Hi there folks, welcome to my first ever attempt at putting together a sketchnote video. So after putting up some of my scribbles and doodles onto the Facebook page around a bit of a process that I've been using to unpack the syllabus, there were a few people who were pretty keen to get a video explainer of it. So yeah, I'll give it a go and see how it all plays out, but you'll soon, I'm sure, find out why I became a PE teacher and not an art teacher. But let's have a go at it, so let's get started. The reason I've put together this process is to try to represent how we can ensure our programs are evidence-based. Within the steps of the process, I've tried to capture the key features of the Understanding by Design framework, the Universal Design for Learning guidelines, and also the visible learning theories that John Hattie puts forward. This is the first part of the process that I use to pull together the big ideas that are going to drive the learning in our program. So I use these to map out a high-level scope and sequence of units. So step one of this part of the process is about collecting as much information as we can about the students that we're going to be teaching. So state or national data from reports like the Health of Young Australians, Mission Australia Youth Survey, Australian Bureau of Statistics data, and also the Australian Sports Commission. They've got some participation data when it comes to young people. Can actually help us build a good picture of what's going on for young people in terms of their health and physical activity participation. So to find out whether these reports are actually reflective of our students, we can also collect local data from within our school or from within the local community context. So this data could be collected at a local level by having conversations with staff, particularly those staff that are in the welfare team, such as your deputy principal, maybe your school counsellor, your year advisors. But you can also partner up with some external agencies that might be engaging with students from your school in roles outside of the school, such as youth workers or PCYC staff, Headspace staff, or even sporting club coaches can give you a bit of a sense of what's going on for the students that you're teaching. But it's important to remember that the best source of information is always the students, so don't be scared to ask them what's going on for them, what they want to learn about, what they like about PDHPE, what they want to see change. So this could be done through running focus groups or just by doing a survey of a representative sample of students. The other really powerful source of evidence that you can collect to start informing your programming is research that's being done in the health promotion and behaviour change fields. And we've got a module in our online course that looks specifically at some of the different behaviour change models that are out there and how they might be used a little bit more intensively when it comes to our programming processes. So once you've collected and collated all of the information in this particular data collection step, the next step's looking at how the evidence can actually shape your programming decisions. So from the information, you should now be able to reflect on what's the real world for your students. So this is where you start to identify what are the things that students value, what do they want to change, what are some of their concerns, and then what are the key challenges that they may face in relation to their health, safety and physical activity participation. So some of these challenges might include things like living in a hyper-connected world. So some of these challenges that your students might encounter could be things like living in a hyper-connected world, where they're always connected, their digital devices are always with them and always on. Also their ability to be able to access accurate information about their health, different relationship or personal issues that might be happening, or even accurate information about physical activity or fitness programs, those sorts of things. It could also be challenges around navigating different relationships that they might be dealing with, and also dealing with the plethora of life choices that they may have. Another one would also be overcoming a sedentary lifestyle or occupation. So as well as developing a better understanding of the challenges that students may face, the information gathering step will also give us a better sense of the attitudes and the behaviours that we're actually trying to influence and address through our PDHPE program. So some of these behaviours and attitudes might include risk-taking behaviours, food choices and their behaviour around eating, being respectful of everyone within their community and celebrating diversity, their behaviours online and their attitudes towards their digital footprint. There could be also some attitudes and behaviours around sexual health and sexuality that you want to address through your program, and also certainly their attitudes towards being active and becoming a lifelong physical activity participant. So from this brainstorming, you can then start clustering these challenges and these attitudes and behaviours into chunks or into coherent sort of categories, so that you can start to formulate some big ideas or some essential questions that can then become the organiser for a unit of work. So let's take a look at a couple of examples that I developed earlier. So let's take a look at an example of how we can unpack that process to come up with an idea for a unit of work. So here we've got just a bit of a sketch note around some data that we've had access to from New South Wales Health around the eating habits of school-aged students. So it's New South Wales-based data, school-aged students, and the first part of that data tells us that 1 in 10 students are actually sitting in front of the TV for dinner on at least 5 nights during the week. We also know from that data that 3 out of 4 students are having breakfast daily. So that means that we need to take into account that 1 in 4 students that we might be teaching may be coming to school without having any breakfast. We also can see from that data that 1 in 5 students are actually having takeaway on more than 1 night per week. And 3 out of 10 students have unrestricted snacking at home. So there's no controls in terms of what they're eating in between meals. There's also some other data there in terms of what students are eating, in particular looking at some of the sugar-based and process-based foods there. So that was state-based data. Now if we have a look at some of the local data that we collected through a survey that was done of students, and also looking at the sales report from the school canteen, we found that 50% of students report that they get money at some stage during the week to buy their lunch from the school canteen. 20% of students are buying drinks or food on the way to school. 30% actually don't get a choice about their lunch, so mum or dad are packing their lunch for them. And then 30% are actually eating takeaway more than 2 times a week. So that's actually twice the number of people that are actually eating takeaway from the school. So that's something that we need to take into account. So taking into account all of the information that we found in that step 1 of the process, where we've collected the data, we can start looking at some of the challenges. So what we did first of all was brainstorm some of the challenges that we thought as staff students might be having, and then we actually confirmed this with students. So just running some focus group activities and asking them some questions and just checking our assumptions. So certainly there were 5 main challenges that were identified by staff and by students. Those were things like the number of choices. So some students were saying they had a lot of choice when it came to food, and that caused a fair bit of confusion, whereas other students were saying that they actually had very little choice when it came to their food that they were accessing, basically because mum or dad or whoever was caring at home were making the decisions about what they ate, what they take to school. So they felt like they had very little control over having a healthy diet. Another area was knowing who to believe online. So certainly they a lot of girls in particular were identifying that they read a lot of blogs from online health experts around nutrition and activity and various other health issues. So, but there wasn't a great deal of confidence about whether that information was accurate or not. Having said that, a lot of students were actually following that advice though, even though there was some doubt in their mind about whether it was accurate. There was also discussion around the accessibility and availability of healthy food. So there were some queries around the options that were available in canteen, and also around the local area in terms of getting breakfast on the way to school and those sorts of things, and also access and availability at home as well. Money came up as an option, so a few students felt that that processed food, packaged food, less healthy options were cheaper, and so they were making their selections based on the perceived value for money. And then also we had a lot of discussion around confusion around labelling and advertising, so how to read food labels, in particular things like the Healthy Star rating, and some of the language that's used around light options being healthier options, less fat options being healthier. So being able to understand some of those labelling conventions was seen as a challenge for some students. So from that data we collected and the challenges and that we identified with the students, from there we were able to come up with a big idea for a unit of work. So that big idea was my food choices can determine how healthy I am and how healthy I feel. And from there we drilled down to identify an essential question that was going to drive the inquiry approach within the unit, and that was a question of how do I know what makes a healthy diet. So we're starting to pick up some of the developing health literacy, but also that critical inquiry approach there. So that was an example for the health space, but you can also use exactly the same process when it comes to planning your movement units of work. So here we've got some data that we've pulled out of the SPANS report, which is a New South Wales-based sport, physical activity and nutrition survey. And we've got some data here in terms of levels of proficiency for boys and for girls in each of these different skills. So this first column of data is taken from the SPANS report, and then over here you'll see that we've done some testing within with a representative group within the school, and we've found some slightly lower scores on average to the SPANS scores. So this is for our Year 7 groups. So from that data, we could then start to unpack some of the difficulties and challenges that some students might have. So in terms of the challenges, again, these were brainstormed by the staff, and then focus groups were used just to confirm with students whether this was the case or not. So certainly some of the data and some of the challenges we identified were things like that most students have had a fairly mixed level of success when it comes to their PE experiences, and certainly it was obvious from the data that there's some gender bias towards particular fundamental movement skills that were tested and the level of skill that boys and girls had in relation to that. There was a fairly high variability when it came to the skill levels. So within a class, you could have some very highly skilled performers and also some very low performing students. So being able to program for that is going to be important. And one of the major barriers to success in performance was certainly students' understanding of gameplay and of some of the more basic tactics and strategies. So it's very hard to practice strategies and gameplay if you haven't actually got proficiency with some of the skills. So certainly that's something that was a big focus when it came to coming up with some big ideas. From the challenges and data identified for this cluster was to focus on the skills and concepts needed to be successful in striking and territorial games. So the essential question we want students to look at is how they can actually hit and kick with the greatest power and control, and starting to unpack and critique those situations within a movement context where they would need power, as opposed to those situations where it might be better to reduce the power and make sure they've got great control. So there's a focus on skill performance, but there's also a focus on some of the strategies and concepts that they need to understand in order to be successful in a range of dynamic situations. So if you're interested in going through these steps in the process in a little more detail, we've actually got an online course that we've developed that's NESA accredited. So if you go through the course and complete all of the tasks, you'll get accreditation for 5 hours. And it basically looks at each of those steps as a separate module. So the first module looks at some of the evidence base that sits behind PDHPE. We then start unpacking some of the data and the information around knowing the needs of your students. And then, as I said before, we've got a fairly comprehensive look at some of the behaviour change and health promotion frameworks that might inform our PDHPE programs. And then the final module unpacks in a little more detail some of those challenges, behaviours, attitudes and decisions that we might be looking to address through our PDHPE program. So if you're interested, you can head on over to this particular URL here, and there's an opportunity there to go through and actually take the course, and you can register and purchase access to the course online. So hopefully this has been useful, and any feedback you've got, please don't hesitate to leave it in the comments below. Thanks very much.